Hey people, it's Niles talking. Now this is from the Financial Times and is titled How Unlocking the Secrets of African DNA Could Change the World. More than 7,000 years ago, during the last Green Sahara period, when the vast North African desert was rain-fed and lush, a child was born with extraordinary powers and the seed of a curse. Locked inside the child was a genetic mutation that gave a heightened immunity to malaria. Over the following 259 generations, the disease would become the deadliest in human history. Indian scribes of the Vedic period called it the king of diseases. Malaria hastened Rome's fall. It killed up to 300 million people in the 20th century alone, 1 in every 20 deaths. The child survived because of a change in hemoglobin, the molecule in red blood cells that carry oxygen, which is then passed on to its descendants. The mutation persisted because it means of survival in malarial sub-Saharan Africa, where its potency held a dark secret. Sometimes when two of these descendants procreated, their children inherited two mutated genes, and their red blood cells collapsed into crescents, clogging their blood vessels. The result is what we now call sickle cell anemia, a painful, sometimes deadly genetic disorder that afflicts 300,000 babies every year, mostly in Africa. The link between sickle cell and malaria was established in the 1950s and a profound impact on the field of human molecular genetics. But the existence of the child, which may be crucial in finding a cure, was not discovered until 2018 by Charles Rotimi and his colleague Daniel Schreiner at the U.S. National Institute of Health. The mapping of the entire human genome, a 13-year effort to list all of the roughly 3 billion letters that make up a person's DNA, was completed in 2003. Since then, the reference genome the scientists used to conduct their research has steadily grown, adding different types of people to further our understanding of the fundamental building blocks of human life. But it remains incomplete. Nearly 20 years on, the vast majority of it is still European. Genetic material from people of African descent makes up just 2%. It was this small portion that produced Rotimi's groundbreaking research. The lack of African genetic material constitutes a significant obstacle to understand how our bodies and diseases function. African genomes are not only humanity's oldest but our most diverse, and that diversity holds within it an almost unfathomable potential. From scientific breakthroughs to gene editing to rewriting of our evolutionary history, the very story we tell ourselves about ourselves. The continent of Africa represents what I would like to call the root and trunk of human evolutionary history, Rotimi tells me over the phone from Maryland, where he is the director of the Center for Research on Genomics and Global Health at NIH. We have lived the longest as humans on the African continent, and that has very, very important implications for understanding how forces that existed on the continent help shape present-day human genomes, even in terms of how to survive infectious diseases or survive the environment. Researchers, academics, drug companies, and startups around the world have really woken up to the potential that Africa offers. A consortium of roughly 500 African scientists is conducting groundbreaking research on the genetic cause of blindness, Alzheimer's, cancer, kidney disease, and other afflictions under the umbrella of the H-Free Africa program, an initiative created by Rotimi and funded by the NIH and UK's Wellcome Trust in 2012. Their work, Rotimi says, is just beginning to bear fruit. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical groups are on the hunt for genomic data from African populations, in some cases provided by new homegrown biotech startups, as they seek to develop the next generation of blockbuster gene-based therapies. There is, however, concern about who will ultimately own Africa's genomic data. A U.S. official told the FT last month that the Trump administration wanted to block China's plans to build an $80 million headquarters for the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention, in large part because of Africa's vast amounts of genomic data. The Chinese want to eventually steal the data, the official said. Beijing called the allegation ridiculous. As the commercial possibilities become clear and private companies from the US, Europe, and China take an interest, scientists in Africa are grappling with the complex ethical implications of practicing an extractive science on a continent with a long history of exploitation from abroad. Roughly 99% of our evolutionary history occurred in Africa. Modern humans emerged there 200,000 years ago. About 100,000 years later, small groups of our collective ancestors began a procreational march around the world. They took with them just a fraction of our genetic diversity. Those in Africa held the vast majority, and they intermarried and reproduced. That diversity remained, buffeted and transformed by environmental pressures, including disease. Tapping into that diversity has implications for all of humanity. Not long ago, a tailor came to my home in Lagos to take my measurements. I asked him if he could also make dresses for my daughters. He said he knew someone he could, my ex-business partner. Actually, he said she was also his ex. Ah, I said, it's always hard to mix business and love. No, it's not that, he said. We're both AS. Inside each human cell is a nucleus of about 20,000 genes made up of strands of DNA that contain 4 chemicals called nucleotides or bases. The entire human genome, which includes all of a person's genes, contains 3.2 billion pairs of these bases. lettered A, C, T, and G, which provide the blueprint for how our cells function. Two copies of the hemoglobin gene sit in each of these cells. For some Africans, one of them is normal, A, and one of them is mutated, S. They carry the sickle cell trait but don't suffer from the disease. Roughly a quarter of Nigerians are AS. The country accounts for half of the babies born with the disease each year. When things between the tailor and his girlfriend got serious, they, like most young Nigerians, took a genetic test. He was unlucky, as many others across Africa and in diaspora are, to have fallen in love with another descendant of a child born in the Green Sahara, hundreds of generations down the line. Genomic research is the search for variation. Humans share roughly 99.9% of their DNA, but there's a difference in what remains that is important. These mutations are known as SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, the equivalent of a single typo in all of the words in a 1,000 Bibles. Most are benign, causing blue eyes or big ears or nothing at all. The ones scientists seek are more dangerous, causing cancer, Alzheimer's, high cholesterol, Parkinson's, and more heroic, protecting us from such afflictions. Without including genetic data of Africans, precision medicine, gene editing, and other scientific advances becoming the province of the white and wealthy. Many genetic tests are already better at predicting breast cancer and type 1 diabetes in patients of European descent than clinical methods because the tests are based on them. This bias is the most critical limitation to genetics in precision medicine, according to a 2019 paper in the journal in Nature Genetics. Broadening genetic research will benefit everyone. Years ago, Dr. Olufunmilayo Olapade, one of America's leading cancer researchers, began noticing higher rates of breast cancer at earlier stages in women in her native Nigeria. In 2018, she co-authored the first ever study to use sophisticated genomics analysis of African women. The results could change the way we think about how breast cancer develops and how it could be screened for regardless of where you come from. For a very long time, we have thought that cancer went through a systemic, slow growth, so you wait until 50 and you get your mammogram once every 2 years and you're going to be okay, said Olopade A. MacArthur, genius grantee and director of the Center for Clinical Cancer Genetics and Global Health at the University of Chicago. I think this has really turned that on its head because you may need to start earlier. And it shows that we need to do more genetic research in Africa because otherwise we'll have the wrong policies, we'll start in the wrong place, and that's why we have not had the kind of progress we needed to have. Advances in sequencing mean finding mutations is increasingly easy. Determining which ones matter is far more difficult. Researchers found that including even a few black people in studies can improve results, but most analysis is done in European ancestry populations because they are the most common in scientific literature. While robust data from African populations, scientists are missing out on the secrets of thousands of generations of human evolution. A recent study of just 910 people of African descent revealed that 300 million base pairs out of more than 3 billion are not found in the reference genome. That's massive. That means that potentially you have 10% of the area that you just don't know, and that completely harms our capacity as scientists to do good science. Say Dr. Ambroise Wonkam, associate professor in the Division of Human Genetics at the University of Cape Town, who is studying the longevity of sickle cell patients. So when we say equity in science now is important, specifically with the African population, it's not about charity. It's something that is absolutely necessary for us to do the science the way it should be done. Otherwise, we all lose. Point G Hospital is a dusty complex of low-slung buildings on a sandstone bluff above Bamako. Down below, the Niger River winds through Mali's sleepy, slant-based capital. I met Dr. Gida Landora, a H3 Africa-funded researcher in the faded baby blue neurology building where his office is lit by fluorescent bulbs in the midday Sahelian sun. His white coat hangs from the curtain rod. Stacks of bursting manila folders are piled half a meter high around his small laptop. He grins wanly as he unfolds his gangly frame to greet me, moving a hand towel in a bashful effort at cleaning up. Landore was born in central Mali, the last of 28 children to a Quranic school teacher and his 3 wives. His family tended cattle. After he completed his PhD at University College London, Landore returned for 3 weeks to the US where he previously worked at the NIH. People were saying, "Why don't you stay?" He said, "No, I came to the country to look for something I could not get at home." PhDs are thousands in the US, thousands in the UK, but a PhD in neurology or neurogenetics in Mali, there are none. My goal is not to go somewhere where it's easy for me to work or where I can get better paid. No, my goal is to come here to get knowledge I can also transmit to our people back in my country, those who did not get the opportunity to come here to train them. In 2013, Landore received his H3 Africa grant to study genetic roots of hereditary neurological disorders such as muscular dystrophy or Huntington's disease. Many disorders are being studied elsewhere. Some even have a cure. We have not even done a survey of these diseases in Africa, he said. 5 months ago, Landore's lab discovered a form of progressive myoclonic epilepsy caused by a genetic mutation that had previously only been documented in 2 of her patients, a German and an Italian. The disorder could be treated with an inexpensive compound called folinic acid. The patient could not even hold their head up and was completely absent. But when we saw him later, he was playing, he says, so you can see how genetics can change a child's life. This is what makes us think that we should continue. Walking through the lab, it is impossible not to recognize the extreme limitations most African scientists must work under. It's completely different, Landore says. An NHS lab in the US comes fully kitted out with expert colleagues to bounce ideas off. But here, when I come, they give you an empty space. You bring everything. The lab has a number of state-of-the-art instruments kept under floral plastic sheeting. Shipping costs and diesel for their generator eat up a lot of the budget. Landuri's H3 Africa funding is being used for the entire neurology department. It funds bursaries for students, the clinic downstairs, and training for students and faculty alike. Important capacity building, though it takes away from the research. But he hopes it will sustain medical research in Mali for years to come, instilling trust in people who might otherwise be wary. I think it's more acceptable to the African population if they see their African peers doing the research, rather than seeing people from the outside, he says. That can remind people of the old days of people coming in and taking the resources and going out. In 1996, the Nigerian city of Kano was hit by the worst meningitis outbreak in Africa's history, infecting 120,000 people. Medicine Sans Frontier and other non-governmental organizations convened at the infectious disease hospital. Another team arrived from Pfizer, the global pharmaceutical companies, which is in the last stage of testing a meningitis drug. Pfizer saw an opportunity for a phase 3 clinical trial, said Babatunde Irokera, the lawyer who represented Nigeria in the lawsuit that followed. They scrambled together a team, started conducting their clinical trial. Pfizer staff wore no badges differentiating themselves from humanitarian workers, he says. People were sending their children to them thinking they were going to treat them, as Irokera, now head of Nigeria's Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. In 2009, Pfizer paid $75 million to settle the resulting lawsuit. It was an indication of the kinds of things that have been going on in this country for years, pharma companies conducting tests without proper controls. Pfizer claims it conducted informed consent. We have no evidence of that. These are people who don't even speak English. In a 2009 statement announcing the settlement, which Pfizer denied any wrongdoing or liability, the group said the 1996 study was conducted with the approval of the Nigerian government and the consent of the participants' parents or guardians, and consistent with Nigerian laws. Commercialization has long been a fraught subject in scientific research, especially when it comes to informed consent and competition. Or I think I've gone on long enough. I'm going to leave the rest of the article in the description for you to read, because I'm only about halfway through, but I'm sure you get the message anyway. So please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. I'm going to leave this article in the description. I'll leave my GoFundMe there if you want to support this channel, and I'll leave my Instagram there as well if you would like to follow me there. Peace.